Hello and welcome to ClearPoint Unlock. We're here today to talk about AI security, why now and why it's everybody's concern to think about. I'm Paul Scott, Chief Operating Officer at ClearPoint, and I'm here with Will. Will, would you like to introduce yourself?
G'day, my name is Will Verland. I'm a lead engineer at ClearPoint. I've been doing agentic software development at various companies the last couple of years, and now I'm bringing that consultant lens to some of our clients on how they can get the most from it.
Fantastic. So we're here to talk a little bit today around AI agents, and for instance like Claude Code, and they seem to be really transforming how software engineers ship code, and a lot of things have clearly changed in the last 12 months. Clearly how security is managed and some of the security challenges with AI agents, and thinking about what they are and maybe how we can manage some of those challenges. For those that maybe aren't from a technical background or aren't software engineers, do you want to just talk us through a little bit around AI agents and why they've got the popularity that they have at the moment?
Yeah, things have moved a lot over the last year or so, where developers have gone from discussing code with the agent through to the agent performing actions on their behalf, opening code changes to be reviewed, reviewing other people's changes, even complete workflows where the agent is writing the code, building it, opening a web browser, testing the code, looking at the logs, all autonomously.
Yeah. So that sounds like it's doing quite a lot of the job that a software engineer could or might be able to do. So that seems to have changed a lot in the last little while.
Developers are automating away the boring grunt work so that they can focus on the strategic work, thinking about the customer problem and thinking about how to keep moving more quickly.
As a business leader in the organisation, my eyes light up when I hear AI agents can take away some of the busy work that software engineers had and can be a lot more efficient and scale and go faster and maybe achieve more. It sounds exciting.
Yeah, we're seeing some of these development cycles really shorten, and the right teams with these tools, they're able to automate a lot of this boring work.
So with this sort of further automation and agents running maybe autonomously, it sounds like there's some new security concerns that have popped up. So, at a high level for a business leader, what should we be worried about?
I think we need to be worried about giving the agents the keys to the castle, because we've seen some examples where that can go wrong and the agents perform actions that we wouldn't want them to perform.
Okay, that sounds a little bit scary. I like the efficiency and the scalability, but obviously we don't want to give out the keys to the castle. So as a business leader, should I not be too worried and just let my engineering teams just continue on without any controls in place, or is there some recommendations around that?
Yeah, I think it's important to take the engineering mindset back to the tooling and thinking about what can go wrong and how you can best control for it to prevent it from being a bit of a big disaster.
I'm looking forward to drilling into a little bit more detail with you on that in terms of some of the more technical controls and some of the war stories that have maybe been out there in the last little while. What are some of the, some of the big changes for you in terms of using these agents versus where you were at a year ago, just to sort of understand how quickly things have moved on?
I think a year ago, most of the use cases were people talking back and forth with the agent about a piece of code. And what we've seen over the past year is the switch to agentic AI, where the AI is now taking actions on behalf of the user, compiling the code, writing the code, and even testing the code themselves.
You said running code as yourself, and just picking on that from a security perspective, I guess it probably makes it quite powerful with those agents running autonomously. Is it using your credentials, as it's sort of busy working in the background there?
Yeah, by default, in most agentic AI setups, the agent is acting as the user, so they've got all of the access that the user might have, which a lot of organizations might not have thought of.
Recently, I think you ran a lunch and learn as part of our AI program here at ClearPoint, talking about some of your learnings, and it certainly seems like things have changed quite a lot in the last year in terms of some of the things to think about, from just organisations just trialling and using agentic workflows for software engineering to where we are now. It also makes them quite powerful, but it seems that the security surface has changed. So what sort of changed in the last 12 months really that people need to really know about?
I think as the adoption of AI and agentic AI has increased, the attackers or malicious actors out there have seen a target.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see attacks in the wild targeting these kind of AI agents like Claude Code.
Yeah, okay. And so obviously, security is for any enterprise is something that's critical to their heart, mine as well, and my role, and I worry about how we keep things safe. So I think we probably should dig into that a little bit more and just understand, what are some of the things we've seen. Is there any sort of standards out there, or is this all sort of evolving as we go in terms of how organisations should deal with these things?
There's some standards out there. I would point to OWASP's LLM cheat sheet and things like that have kind of soft published out there. But everything's moving very quickly, and so organisations are having to make things up as they go along.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was really, really interesting. Your Lunch and Learn recently, we shared a few war stories of things that are actually out in the public and how agentic workflows are being used by bad guys. And let's dig into one of those. Do you want to talk us through one of the examples you've got, maybe the NX Singularity one, and go from there?
Yeah, the NX Singularity attack has been really interesting as attackers start to target agentic AI, and this was one of the cornerstone cases where we saw direct targeting of agentic AI on developers' machines. So the NX1 Singularity involved a NPM package called NX. It's a really common tool that developers use in Node.js monorepos. The attackers took over the GitHub repository that was used for publishing this package, and they used it to craft a malicious version of this package. What that meant was that when developers ran npm install, or they installed the package, and often when Claude itself installed the package, it ran a malicious script that actually gave instructions to Claude Code or Gemini running on the developer's machine, and it recruited the agent to go looking for secrets and credentials on the developer's laptop, and then exfiltrated them out via a public repository.
Okay, so interesting. So essentially saying the script writing, developers thought that was trusted, and it sort of just ciphered, gone through that person's machine and found all of their credentials and secrets and sent them off to some baddies somewhere.
Yeah, they used a workflow that developers are used to running every day without thinking, and weaponized the agent against them.
So sort of used a trusted piece of software really to do that. I guess it's a tough one then, being an engineer then in 2026 and using tools that you trust and having to sort of double check everything and think about these things. What were your sort of thoughts on that one, and where did you sort of go when you saw that, or how were you thinking about that one?
Yeah, as a class of attacks, we're seeing these supply chain attacks more often. And it sounds scary, but there's certainly things that you can do as an organization. There are controls that you can apply that are really effective against these kinds of attacks.
So with that particular one, how would you suggest people think about controls to protect against it?
The main advice I would give these people running these agents on their machines is to sandbox them. So by default, a lot of these agents have access to the full file system on the developer's laptop and the ability to do things as the developer. And quite often, those are out of scope of the piece of work that you're doing. There's plenty of options out there of a sandbox that you can put the agent in, and it prevents the agent from reading files outside of the task that you're currently working on. And that alone would have been really effective against this kind of attack. The agent will only have access to the secrets it needs to perform its current task, which is usually no secrets at all for local development.
So, I mean, look, if I'm in charge of corporate technology in my organisation, I've rolled out my EDR solution, my antivirus, I've got my firewalls. Am I not protected automatically, or is there something else? Well, to talk to me a little bit about the sandboxing, and, it sounds more than what I've probably got in place. How do we need to think about that?
The change in the threat model with agentic AI is that these machines now have agency, and they can be recruited to do things that the user or the organization might not want them to do. It's the same kind of attacks, but they happen a lot faster and at volume that we didn't previously see. And so tools like EDR could be helpful in indicating that something has happened, but they might not be jumping in fast enough.
And I guess with cyber, the speed is important. By the time you've sort of figured it out, as you said, your secrets are gone and they've been used somewhere, and they're into the dark web. So what about the sandboxing you talked about? Let's talk us through what that looks like.
Yeah, so like I said, by default, a lot of these agents will run on the machine and have access to all of the things that the developer does. And the sandbox just allows you to give the agent just the things that it needs. This is the principle of least privilege. It's not new in security. People are used to it. And you can quite quickly apply some quite powerful controls. You can limit the agent to just working in the code space that the developer normally works in. And you can also prevent it to talking to other websites to exfiltrate information. So there's kind of controls on both inputs and outputs. And if the agent can't phone home, it can't steal your information.
So as an engineer with an ask to let's say, to a CTO or CIO, you need some sort of sandboxing solution. What sort of tech are we talking about here?
Yeah, there's lots of options out there. Docker sandboxes is coming along as quite the contender that people are using. The key point isn't the specific technology, it's the pattern, right? How can you apply the principle of least privilege to these agents that are operating on your developers' machines?
Yeah. And we're talking about identities a little bit as well, and it's something I'm thinking about. As you say, a lot of these things are just running using your own credentials. When you're talking about these sandbox agents, would they have their own identity so you maybe can have transparency in terms of what they're doing, or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, these tools are quite configurable, so you can start with basically how you're currently working and work to lock them down. So reiterating the principle of least privilege, would recommend that you give agents their own identities with just permissions that they need to do their jobs. So you'll never want your agent to delete a GitHub repository. You'll never want it to publish a release by itself or merge a pull request, right? Yeah. You can control that with a GitHub token that you give it.
That sounds like a lot of hard work to clean up.
Yeah.
So just continuing on, were there any other controls we could think about for that particular exploit?
Yeah, the great news is that a lot of the existing security controls are good at preventing these kinds of attacks. And as supply chain attacks become more prevalent, the one control that comes to mind is package cooldowns. So if you're using a centralized repository like Azure Artifacts or Artifactory, you can configure it so that your developers will only get new versions of packages once they've been out for a day or so.
Okay.
And if we look at the NX1 Singularity attack, the malicious versions of the packages were only out there for 6 hours.
Wow.
So if you had that kind of cooldown in place, you also wouldn't have been involved in the
So the community can start flagging those things up, so you're not necessarily at the bleeding edge of those latest tools. I guess that's a reflection of a lot of those packages quite often are open source, maintained, and et cetera, and can get out into the wild quite quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. So usually when these malicious actors hijack a repository, even if the open source authors of the repository don't get in quickly, organizations like GitHub will. In the NX1 Singularity attack, even GitHub themselves were able to take down a whole bunch of the malicious repositories inside of that 6-hour window. Okay.
Sounds like a great recommendation. So a couple of great controls that organizations can practically implement and experiment with. As a COO, one of the things I'm worried about is phishing and other attacks that come in via email, and we certainly do a lot of awareness training and simulations on that. But this next sort of war story was the Echo Leak one, which started with an email as well. So yeah, it'll be interesting to understand a little bit about that.
Yeah, Echo Leak was the first large-scale prompt injection attack that we saw that was exploiting these agents. So in this case, this was exploiting GitHub Copilot. Now, GitHub Copilot had a feature where it could search through your emails to provide you contextual answers to your questions. And an attacker managed to sneak a prompt targeting agents into a malicious email. And when the person asked GitHub Copilot a question, it would fetch that email. And the email instructed it to find all of the secrets and email it back to the attacker. And this was something that GitHub Copilot just went and did autonomously.
The user didn't have to click anything or click an email or they followed all the security guidelines. And
so this was a zero-click attack against Microsoft Copilot. And Microsoft Copilot has security controls in place that are meant to defend against this kind of prompt injection attack. And all of these controls were defeated in this specific attack. The attackers were quite clever. They used markdown images that would auto-load and fetch a malicious script from the attacker side. And they also leveraged a similar auto-loading image bug to exfiltrate secrets via query parameters to Microsoft Teams URL. So really cunning. This points to a lot of the agentic integrations that organizations are rolling out. There's a need to be considered about how many systems you're connecting these agents to and how you can containerize that information or put blast doors in place, segmenting the important information to prevent attackers from stealing it. And that sandboxing approach we talked about earlier, where you can try and build a bit of a walled garden around your agents, is quite effective against defending this kind of attack, so that when the model doesn't hold, the box does.
Yeah, okay. That's interesting. You talk about when the model doesn't hold, and I think in your lunch and learn session you talked about sort of 4 layers and four rings. Do you want to just walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's kind of 4 rings of attack surface that we see being exploited on these models. So there's the model itself. We've talked about prompt injection attacks, and vendors have put a lot of work into defending against prompt injection attacks. We've got reinforcement learning against it. There's classifiers that look at the input and output from the models and try to detect prompt injection and things like that. They're fairly effective. There was a particular classifier control that Anthropic introduced where the prompt injection attacks were reduced from 80% by their red teamers down to 4.4%. Really effective, but things can still slip through these layers. So when the model doesn't hold, that's when we start to talk about the things around the model, like sandboxing.
Yeah.
Can we restrict access to the file system for things it doesn't need? Can we restrict access to the network for things it doesn't need to talk to? Again, if the model can't phone home, then it can't steal your secrets.
Yeah.
And then once we think outside of that, we can think about network controls, like can we restrict what access to MCP servers it can talk to? Can we have a cooldown period for packages that it talks to? And then the final layer that we talk about is around the code base. So your existing CI/CD controls that you might have. Look, if you've got unit tests and security scanning happening, that's great. But are they required? Can the agent merge the pull request anyway?
Yeah. So that sounds like going back to some, good practice, best practice, software engineering principles, making sure you've got those in place as well. So that again, even if the agent is malicious, just like a human could be, that you're able to pick those up. Certainly the game seems to have certainly changed quite significantly. What are your thoughts on the speed of innovation and moving quickly and picking up these new agentic technologies and the benefit that can come with that in terms of efficiency and how much more you can do versus the handbrake, the security handbrake? Where does that sort of lie in? And with organisations, how should organisations be thinking about that?
I think that it's important to take a measured approach for AI adoption. It's good to move fast and break things, but if you're breaking your own things, that's not going to help you very much. There's an old saying that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. If you give your people time to learn about their technology and how it works, they can make informed decisions about how to move forward with it safely.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. The playbook on some of this agentic AI security, as I said, it's not necessarily there. An organisation out there that wants to really leverage the technology to build their products faster, etc. How do they sort of stay up to date and keep on top of these things?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's lots of information out there coming from various sources. Anthropic specifically has some great free training out there that you can use, and we've seen engineers that use it every day, do this free training and have a whole bunch of light bulb moments about how they can leverage things more effectively. And your podcasts like this, there's YouTube, YouTube channels, all sorts of sources of information out there that people can stay on top of.
So Will, I think we've sort of pulled apart a couple of those war stories, if you like, but I just wanted to pick up on something you mentioned in one of those and be maybe good to sort of bring that together, right? I think what it sounds like is that with some solid software engineering hygiene, it sounds like there's some good news that some of the risk can be managed. Let's just summarise what some of those key things are that could be managed with good hygiene.
Yeah, so I talked about the principle of least privilege a lot. If you restrict agents and developers into only being able to do what they need to do, you can really restrict the blast radius of a lot of these attacks. If you think about ransomware attacks or things like that, if the developer doesn't need to be able to delete data, then don't give them that permission. If the agent doesn't need to ever merge pull requests, don't give them that permission. I've seen agents try to merge pull requests and then be blocked because they don't have permissions, right? And so you can apply these deterministic controls to these non-deterministic large language models.
Gotcha.
And they're really effective. And the same thing is true for static code analysis. Look, if these changes introduce a library with known vulnerabilities, don't allow the pull request to be merged. Require those checks to pass. So, Paul, you sponsor ClearPoint's 27001 ISO rollout, a whole bunch of security controls. How do you feel about some of these stories when you hear them?
Well, to be honest, it scares the hell out of me because a lot of the pieces that we're working on, from our ISO 27001, it's looking to put controls in place for things that are well established and well known. But with some of these AI agentic pieces, it's clearly evolving very quickly, right? So, zero-click attacks. Okay, well, that's not necessarily something we've got a specific control for. So I think I do like some of the things you've talked about, and I think controls we should think about as we move more into managed agents, the things like least privilege, so again, so our agents that are running, they don't run under super user accounts or that sort of thing. So it does limit the blast radius, as you say, as well as making sure we've got really clear policies and processes in place and training for people to help them understand, so that as things do evolve, that they are able to consider them, especially when dealing with client data, confidential data, be it source code or whatever it might be, or client IP, and how we put them into models and what those models are used for is quite critical. Some of the things that I get asked quite frequently at the moment, especially by clients, is the data that we're going to use as part of this going to be used to train the model? Is any humans going to be reviewing some of the data that goes in? So these are some of the things that clients are thinking about, and how long is that data going to be retained for? Those are some of the sort of risks that I get asked about, but ultimately, the innovation and the speed that can come with what agentic AI can do, either in software engineering or in operations, is pretty epic. So, we really want to be a frontier firm, so we're leaning into it, and so we need to manage those risks rather than just going, oh, well, let's just shut everything down and, let's just not use AI because it's too risky. That's clearly not an option. So, we just got to have the right policies and then manage the risks as we go, my thought.
I can certainly see the uncomfortable position as a risk owner in a business that you might find yourself in. And what I find myself saying to clients is, don't panic. Existing processes that we've got will find your way through this maze. And I kind of see two types of organizations with AI adoption. There's organizations who are going to get left behind asking, is AI safe? And there's organizations that are going to succeed saying, what can AI do? We've been put in a bit of a catch-22 recently with some of these supply chain attacks, where on one side we're saying implement a cool down and don't adopt brand new packages because they might be compromised. And on the other side of things, we have Project Glasswing that's finding vulnerabilities within minutes of patches being published, and attackers going out and exploiting Microsoft updates within hours of them being released. And those two realities can't exist in the same time. You can't wait a couple of days to patch and also patch within minutes.
Yes.
And it comes back to defense in depth. Organizations need to move on from let's never get attacked into once the attacker gets into our system, what happens next?
Yeah.
And as organizations start to hear about these different types of attacks and risks, it's all about building a risk register and a bit of a threat model about what you care about, and then building your controls in until you're happy with the residual risk. You just need to be systematic about how you approach these things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. I think that defense at depth is important. As you sort of said, if you go back to one of those ones with the GitHub Copilot, you've got a large vendor with in Microsoft that owns that product and is managing it, and they've got a huge army of security consultants keeping them safe, and that's fine. And 99.9% of the time they pick it up. But if not, what other controls have we got in place, as you say, that we can actually put in place if something goes wrong? And I think that's, as you say, when you're evaluating the risk and you understand what that residual risk is, what part of that residual can you deal with? Can you accept it? Can you transfer it to someone else, or do you have to deal with it? So those are all sort of things we think about, constantly as part of our ISO 27001 position. But, we can just ultimately do the best we can with the risks and evaluate them. We're not going to be able to stop them all, as you say, right? It's complex, but with those different layers of depth, we can try and manage it. Yeah.
We've talked about AI agents as a software detractor for quite a while, but one thing that I encourage people to do is think about AI agents as a way to improve their security posture. Now, for my AI Lunch and Learn talk, I talked about a bunch of scary threats, but also some controls that you can put in place. And one of the exercises I recommended that people did is they took the slide deck, gave it to Claude, and said, hey, walk me through my own risk profile and my own threat model and help me pick one or two controls that reduce that residual risk right down. And another angle on that is if you think about threat modeling as an exercise in software development. Now, previously, this was something that would take us a cybersecurity team, could take dedicated software. And now it's something that I'd encourage people to build into every new feature that they build. You need to ask the AI, I'm adding this new feature, help me build a threat model of what can go wrong. And you can apply really targeted controls to build that defense in depth into every layer of what you're doing.
Yeah. It's building those repeatable processes. And I know that we had, as we've just gone through our ISO journey, we had a discussion around, well, what can we get in terms of our policies, and what can we do to build skills that could be plugged into pipelines to actually ensure that everything we do is in alignment with policy. So I think that's an area we're looking through. But the bit I like about that is, you can take those policies and those standard approaches, and you can actually sort of ensure that they're actually applied consistently. I think as much as you want, you can, with the human element, you can give people policies, you can train them, you can make them aware of it, but sometimes things just don't get followed, right? And that's that human error. So I think with that, defense depth, when you've got another layer of AI being able to come in and check some of those things as part of that threat model, then, it adds a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, and there's something to be said about making it easier to do the right thing. I like the phrase, fall into the pit of success. Some of those policy controls I've actually sprinkled through some of my workflows, right? I find myself working with the client's Claude and my own Claude, and I've told the agents which environment they're in and some of the controls that they apply. And so Claude will chip in and say, hey, just a reminder, no restricted data in here. This is the client's environment. Yeah. And some of that in-context feedback that just makes it easy to do the right thing.
Yeah. Well, it's great for the client, it's great for us, right? And in terms of they've got assurances actually that they're being kept safe, and then from our side as the service provider as well, that we're being safe as well.
So it's not just software developers that are using these agents in organizations. I'm aware there's marketing, salespeople using Claude Cowork. How are organizations thinking about security with those use cases?
Yeah, really, really good question. And at ClearPoint, we've extensively been using AI agents outside of engineering, so in our core functions, in our shared functions like you've talked about, marketing and sales and the likes. We've tried various different solutions, but what we've got a lot of success with is Claude Cowork. What I do like about Claude Cowork, unlike Claude Code, it's got sandboxing built in already. So each of your Cowork sessions actually runs in a little container that's on your local desktop. So to a certain extent, it's got some of those sandboxing controls built in. You give it access to just a single folder on your machine. The other control that we actually can build in and we can control is which integration points we've approved. So again, we can go through and actually do a risk assessment on which points we want. Do we want it to have it, give it access into our drive with all of our client folders, into our CRM system or into our ERP? And so that gives us a high level of control across those as well. And we can also, control some of the network pieces. So do we not want it to connect to certain sites or certain websites? So great tool as a personal assistant and agent in terms of helping folks with their workflows. And certainly significant risk in place, but with some of those things in place, especially around some of the integration controls, we can sort of start to manage it while still let the organisation experiment and get the benefit from agentic workflows. Be it creating copy or reviewing a legal agreement or whatever it might be. It's been highly successful for us.
Yeah, a lot of the controls are already there, right? I think once you understand some of the risks, you can quite quickly go through the list and make sure that you're covered off.
Yeah, and I think it's about maturing as an organisation. When we first when we first roll out some of these tools, rather than locking everything down, we want to get adoption going, and so we try and enable as much as we can, and then review as we go, and start to apply controls once we can see how the organisation is using it. The other thing is, I think a lot of people know, Claude Cowork, it was built in 10 days. So the V1s often don't have a lot of enterprise control. So you have to get comfortable with that. And as they add in and get released over time, then you can start to enable them. And that's certainly the approach we've taken.
Yeah, I think that approach of letting people experiment to start with within boundaries, setting expectations with them, but not necessarily locking everything down is a great approach. And look, I've heard of organizations that have said no AI, only to find out a few months later that everyone's uploading their source code to their personal Copilot accounts that are doing training on things. So, just saying no might not be enough for organizations. It just drives it underground.
100%. Like, you speak to an organisation that will say no, you speak to their engineers and they've got a shadow account somewhere, right? The benefit is clearly there. So, we've taken the other approach. We've encouraged and then we come back and see how people are using it and try and put controls in. when we start out, we are very careful when we do enable integration into our crown jewels. We've gone through and done the risk assessment, etc., before we've enabled some of those access. We'll start on a pilot basis. But once you start opening up those integrations, that's where the true value of a lot of these agentic workflows are in the operations of a business. If they're not connected into your core systems, actually, they can't orchestrate business processes that you would do. So it's inevitable that you're going to open up those integrations, and that's where you get the benefit. But if you do it in a measured way, you can manage the risk.
Yeah, certainly with working with people on the ground, you hear they're the ones that find the interesting use cases. I think that another mistake we see is organizations trying to dictate the change top down, but actually giving people the tools and saying, look, see what you can find is where we find the coolest use cases that really drive the business forward.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you've got to have support. If you've got support from the top, in terms of building a culture of experimenting and using AI within the business, you will flourish. I think it's different to dictating. I think having the right culture built, but you want to empower people, as you say, because ultimately only those who are actually executing their business process probably know where the benefit and savings can come from in terms of making their lives easier. And if they haven't got support from up top, then they're not going to feel empowered to try things and experiment. And that's a lot of the time what it is. We've really empowered everybody, and then that's sort of enabled us to see. We've got 100% usage across our company of everyone in the company using AI every day, and we wouldn't have that otherwise. We didn't have that culture and set those expectations of that we want to be that frontier firm. Great.
Yeah. I'm curious to hear what sort of questions are clients asking you about AI and security at the moment?
They're asking a lot of questions. So I quite often get involved in the contracting phase when we're about to do some services for clients. Because a lot of our services, or all of our services now, are pretty much AI enabled in one way or another. It's sort of critical to how we deliver and our value proposition, be it AI software engineering or our consulting. What clients are interested in is the safety of their data, so confidentiality, and they want to protect their intellectual property, which could be quite a differentiator for them. So quite often we're asking to ingest their critical documents or code into models, and so they're trying to understand what's going to happen. They're asking us, first of all, who's got access to that? Who's going to see it? So when we ingest into a model, is there someone at OpenAI or an Anthropic that can have a look at their document or their information? So that human review. And the other big one is training. So obviously, these models have all been trained on data, and so our clients wouldn't like their data used to train models and essentially the model to learn their IP. So those are probably the key questions I get asked over and over. And the answer is different providers that we work with have different sort of enterprise agreements and different approaches to some of these things. So what we've seen, for example, is we've agreed with some clients that we would use some models for work and not others. And so it's sort of on a case-by-case basis at this point. It's still early days in terms of how this works, but from ClearPoint, our policy on this is we want to be transparent with clients how we're using AI, and we've got AI clauses as part of our standard agreements now that provide this transparency, but also give the client the ability to opt out and say, hey, for this piece of work or for this data, I don't want AI used, and that's fine. That's something we understand, and that we will work with the client to make that happen. But it does sometimes start to make life a little bit difficult when all of our services are AI enabled. It's a bit of a journey, but that's where we are at the moment. Certainly the situation has changed significantly in the last 12 months. In the last 12 months, a lot more parts of an enterprise are involved in getting some of our engagements off the ground when we're using AI, be it security and legal and etc. But organisations are certainly getting a lot more comfortable, and clients that I talk to in their legal and procurement teams are certainly seeing a lot more AI clauses and approach. So it's certainly changing, but those risks, how do I protect my IP and confidential data, are still the top ones out there. Yeah.
That disclosure is quite important to front foot the conversation, right? It's something that you want to be having at the beginning of the engagement, not at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's sort of the guidance to our teams. Trust with our clients is is paramount. So we don't want to be just putting their data into a model without them knowing. By and large, we at the beginning of a project, we'll set out the scope of how we would use the client's data and AI, and as long as we've gone through that process, then the client benefits from the massive efficiency gains that we can get with AI. So generally, they're pretty happy to do it, but again, we've got our policy, we be transparent, we get permission, and then we move forward. Yeah.
That transparency policy can have other benefits as well. I've had experiences with clients where they'll note that we've incorporated AI into one of our solutions, and it becomes a tooling conversation, and we can fill that kind of trusted advisor role with a client where they can think about how they can involve AI into their own processes and gain those efficiency and productivity benefits as well.
Yeah. The other one actually just coming to mind, a recent discussion I had with a client was around third-party IP. And so, if we're building software for a client and we're using AI, is that an original piece of work or not? So I think that's sort of a conversation that's still sort of out there. Would we indemnify the client if that IP, if that code that got generated actually, because it was trained on some code out there, was someone else's IP? So I think that's an area that everyone's sort of just watching and going, well, actually, what's the legality around the stuff that's coming out, and who owns it, and what if it was someone else's IP? So it's still an area I think that's under discussion.
Yeah, that sounds like something that's really important to consider.
So maybe let's just mix it up, and just want to go to a few sort of quick fire questions and put you on the spot here actually with just, one or a few word answers, and then maybe send some back my way. With some of these agents, so dangerously skip permissions, is that a good thing or is it a menace?
Straight on the laptop, it's a liability. In a sandbox, I wouldn't run it without it.
Okay, so I need to get myself a sandbox then, I think, based on my habits. What's one security habit that everyone listening should adopt this week?
Put your agents in a sandbox. It's going to keep the credentials away from them and stop them shipping them home to the attacker.
Okay, and what's the most overrated security control and the most underrated?
I think the most overrated control is relying on humans to review every command and hit yes or no. You stop reading them after 4 hours.
I'd stop reading them after 5 minutes, but fair enough.
And the most underrated control, I'd say, is sandboxing.
Sandboxing, okay. I certainly got to get myself a sandbox. So from a security perspective, are we going to be winning or losing in 12 months when it comes to AI security?
I think we're going to be winning. Look, there'll be winners and losers. The winners will be saying, what can my agent do? The losers will be saying, is AI safe? The important thing is to take a nuanced view.
Brilliant. I like it. Yeah.
So with AI running around the organization, what keeps you up at night?
Well, the first thing is cost, because that's crazy, but it just keeps ticking. But we're here to talk about security. So I think the key thing that keeps me up at night is what you talked about, all of the different integrations that we bring in place. It's that the data leaking from our key data sources into the models, and where that may end up, our crown jewels, all of our key data. Once that gets integrated in and into the models, who might knows what happens. So just protecting that critical client data.
What's one question every board should ask about AI this quarter?
Well, look, I'm going to put security one side here, but they should be asking how we're using AI to innovate our business model and how we're using AI to deliver more efficiently to clients.
Great. ISO 27001, paperwork or protection?
Protection. I know this is quick fire, but let me just tell you, from ClearPoint implementing ISO 27001, it's significantly uplifted the security capability of our organisation. Putting policies and controls in place significantly provide protection at depth, and it's brilliant for our clients, it's brilliant for us. So there's paperwork involved, but the true benefit comes from those controls, so 100% protection.
And it sounds like it's asking questions you might not know to ask, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just providing you some structure and rigor to make sure you've got controls in place and you're actually operationalizing them, because, it's easy to write a policy that says you're going to do X, Y, and Z, but if people aren't trained, if they're not up to speed, if you haven't got the checks and balances in place to actually ensure that you're following that policy and you've got that control, then you don't have that defence ultimately. So that's what it brings for me. And look, we're still early on in the journey, but there's massive benefit there.
Great. So would you let an agent loose on your laptop?
Up till now, yes, but I'm clearly going to be getting some sandboxing implemented, as you've mentioned today.
And what surprises some of our clients is it's 15 minutes. Honestly, it doesn't change your workflow too much. So if there's one takeaway people have, it's certainly chuck it in a sandbox.
Yeah. No, absolutely, absolutely. I think, look, I've definitely got agentic technology running on my laptop, and I probably wouldn't go as far as to say I'm letting it loose, but definitely some great learnings there and getting that sandboxing in place and some of those other defence mechanisms that you've mentioned. Yeah, so that's what I'll be doing straight after this podcast.
Yeah, and I'm certainly not advocating for letting the prisoners run the prison, but
Yes.
Claude will get you a long way in understanding what your own threat model is and one or two controls that will control most of the risk.
Yeah, fantastic. I guess we've come to an end of the podcast, and AI security and why it's now and why it's everyone's problem. And thank you for taking us through those war stories and some of those controls. If you were just to sort of give us a final takeaway before we end, what would it be?
Yeah, a lot of these things sound scary, and the mistake is to do nothing at all because it all seems a bit much. Perfect is the enemy of good, and if you can take one or two controls away from this and implement them in your organization, you're going to be much better off.
Awesome. I certainly will be taking some insights and getting those sandboxes up in play. And thanks very much, Will, and see you on the next podcast.
Looking forward to it.